All right, man. Mr. Chair, the room is ready.
Very good, thanks. Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, April 28th, 2021 meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. I'm David Carter, the Commission Chair, and before we continue, I'm going to turn this over to, forgive me, is it Kyle or Becky who will give an overview of the conduct of the meeting?
I'll do that.
Very good, thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Becky Pepper, the Planning Manager. Joining me in the City Commission room is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director, and Kyle Kobe, who will be helping facilitate the Zoom video portion of the meeting. We will work alongside the Chair, who is on remote video, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Currently, we have everyone muted so we can all talk through the general ground rules for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the City's YouTube channel. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found in the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu. Next to, we good?
You're good.
When you're muted, a red line will appear over the icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. You can also turn your video camera on or off by clicking the video icon in the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on for the duration. If you're participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. When you're somewhere on your Zoom screen, you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker, while gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. Commissioners, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Members of city staff must also state their name and title each time they speak. And I would also ask that the applicants and members of the public identify themselves each time before they speak to ensure that everyone is able to follow along. When public comment is sought on an item, individuals participating via Zoom should use the raise hand feature. Windows and Mac users can access this feature through the participants button on the bottom of their screen. Android and iPhone users can access this feature through the More button located at the bottom right-hand corner of their screen. And for those calling in by phone, you may dial *9. Individuals will be called upon by name in the order they appear on the meeting host screen. And when you're called upon, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The Chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct you to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. The regular 3-minute time limit will apply. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call each commissioner individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. I want to again remind everyone to please mute yourself when you are not speaking, and now I'll turn the meeting back over to the Chair.
Thank you, Becky. David Carter, Chair. Let's begin with recognition of the minutes from our March 22nd and March 24th meetings. Those minutes are in our packets, and assuming everyone's had a chance to review those, I would accept a motion to approve unless there are any amendments or changes. Commissioner Struckoff, a motion to approve. Do I have a second? Commissioner Ashworth. Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director.
Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Carter.
Yes.
Commissioner Payton.
Yes.
Commissioner Sands.
Yes.
Commissioner Tank.
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff.
Yes.
Commissioner Willie.
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Do any commissioners have any reports of committees that have met in the past month? Commissioner Struckoff.
Commissioner Eric Struckoff. The Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board met in April, and we approved some amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program. Received some updated performance measures on our system performance, that is things like traffic flow, incorporation of sensitive lands into certain developments, and had a few quick updates on our intelligent transportation systems from our MPO staff.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Struckoff. Any other reports? Very good. Jeff, can I ask if there are any written communications from the public that are not already in our packet?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services.
Items are part of your packet this evening.
Thank you. Any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or any other commissioners?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. No additional items that are not listed on your agenda.
Thank you. David Carter, Chair. How about, I understand there is one document, the Transportation 2040 Amendment 1, that we're supposed to recognize?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. Correct. We wanted to share this with the Planning Commission because Transportation 2040 is ingrained in part of Plan 2040. And as part of Commissioner Struckoff has kind of mentioned earlier, is there was an amendment that was passed and added at the request of KDOT to add 2 projects to the list. And the information related to those projects and the scope of them are part of that memo there. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have on that item.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Do any commissioners have any questions about the amendment? There being none, thank you, Jeff. Duly received. And any written action of waiver requests or determinations made by the city engineer?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services, none this evening.
Thank you. David Carter, Chair. How about commissioners? Any ex parte communications to report?
Seeing none. Any declarations of abstentions from specific agenda items? All right. This is the part of the meeting where we recognize general public comment for items that are not already on the agenda. If there's any public comment, please use the Zoom feature that Becky described earlier to raise your hand. And while folks look for that, I'll ask Becky or Kyle if there's anyone in the chamber who has shown up for public comment.
Kyle Covey with Planning. There is no one here to provide public comment at this time.
Very good. And any raised hands?
Kyle Covey with Planning. There are also 0 raised hands at this time.
All right. Thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. With that, we get to our regular agenda. Item 1, consider approving a preliminary plat for Cornerstone Church Addition at the corner of O'Connell Road and East 25th Terrace. And I believe Catherine is going to present on this.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. Catherine Reed, planning staff, and I apologize ahead of time. I keep getting a notice that says my internet is unstable. So if I need to repeat something, please feel free to let me know. So this item is to consider approving a preliminary plat for Cornerstone Church Addition. The request is to replat to consolidate 33 lots into one large lot and remove the formerly dedicated right-of-way through the property that will no longer be needed for internal circulation. This is going to be the proposed location for the Cornerstone Baptist Church. Just some items of note: the property is located in Tier 1 of Lawrence's urban growth area, which is designated in Plan 2040. And the property is also located within the boundaries of the Southeast Area Plan. The future church is a permitted land use in single and multi-dwelling districts, this area is recommended for future residential, low and medium density residential use as per Plan 2040. So this church has owned the lots and they no longer wish to develop them as residential properties for detached dwelling and would prefer to move their church to this location. The existing land use is vacant and has been vacant, so it has not been developed prior. So the proposed replatting is not changing the general use or development of the overall subdivision. It is changing this particular parcel ownership. As referenced in the staff report, and I can answer more questions on this if you have them, this property underwent a similar replatting process in 2011 to remove the residential lot lines. That preliminary plat, PP 4511 was approved by the Planning Commission in June of 2011. And the rezoning to RM12D was approved by the City Commission on July 5th of 2011. Ordinance 8640. So the final plat, which is the next step after a preliminary plat, was not submitted. And so that preliminary plat expired in July of 2013. So the applicant is now reinitiating the platting process. And to do that, they have to go through the preliminary platting process again. And so they're trying to make the same proposed modification for this parcel that they had prior. So in reviewing preliminary plats, in particular for the south east area plan, we look at zoning, character of the area, future land uses, the environmental or thoroughfare aspects as related to that southeast area plan. In staff's review, staff is finding that it is in conformance with the criteria, and staff is recommending approval of this preliminary plat. And I'd be happy to go through any of those criteria if you should have questions about them specifically. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Catherine. David Carter, Chair. Is the applicant or representative here who'd like to say something to amend Catherine's comments?
Yes, Chair, this is Dean Grove with Grove Engineering. I really don't have a presentation to add to what Catherine's provided you, but I'll sure answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Grove. David Carter, Chair. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this item? If so, please raise your hand with the Zoom function. And again, I'll ask Kyle if you can tell me if anybody's in the commission chamber.
Kyle Covey with Planning. There's nobody in the room with us to speak on this item. And as of this moment, there are no digital hands being raised.
All right, thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. With that, I'll turn it over to the commission for any questions to Catherine or the applicant. I guess I'll ask a question. I'm not sure if it's to Catherine or to Mr. Grove. If you have any idea of why the applicant didn't follow through with the final plat back in 2011 or 2013, any information on that?
I have no idea. I think they bought the property and intended to put it in one lot, and maybe they had considered, a couple lots rather than one. Other than that, I do not know why that didn't happen.
Thank you, Mr. Grove. David Carter, Chair. Any other questions? If there are no questions, would anyone care to make a motion? I see Commissioner Carpenter is unmuted.
Yeah, Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. I just want to make a comment about this before we get to the motion.
Sure.
With all the emphasis on affordable housing, we have a permissible use. It's going to be approved. However, we're wiping out 33 probably more affordable developable lots in one fell swoop. So I don't know how we address this in the future, or if we even want to address this in the future, but we don't have the annexation rules in yet. As a board, as a commission, we're basically saying no to, development in tier 2 at the edge of the city. So we're focusing on infill development. Here we're wiping out building lots. So I know it doesn't have a place in this discussion now, but I just want to raise that as an issue. That is something, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow in some respects here.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. David Carter, Chair. That's I guess I'll follow that up with a question to Mr. Grove. And I'm not sure if this is, just like you wouldn't necessarily have information on the final plat. This is a part of Lawrence that's growing, that has been growing. And yet this plot of land was vacant long enough that the owner decided to consolidate the multiple plats into one. Any background information on that move or that decision?
You're correct. They've owned the lots for quite some time. I think they just didn't get in when the first preliminary plat was done, even before 2011. But they bought the lots, and they were some partial lots, and other things occurred. That they had always intended on putting a church there. Fundraising and other things, kind of dictated that. But they just, again, weren't there at the very first step, when the area was platted to say, okay, we want this big chunk. But, when they made that decision and bought those, again, there were some partial lots. It wasn't just that they ever had any intention to develop them as single family lots. It's just, that's what they bought, and just funding and finding their church had grown enough, and they've now sold their existing facility and working out of a temporary site, to get in here. So I understand Jim's concern, but, it wasn't that, hey, they're just now doing it. They've had that intention since day one. It's just that now come to fruition to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Grove. That's helpful. Any other questions from commissioners, or would Commissioner Sinclair, I think I saw your hand go up earlier.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Yeah, I was willing to make a motion.
Please go ahead.
If you'll take it.
Certainly.
I move that we approve the preliminary plat for Cornerstone Church Edition based on the findings listed in the body of the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. Do I have David Carter, Chair? Do I have a second? Yes, Commissioner Ashworth. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? All right, Jeff, can I ask you to read the roll, please?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. That brings us to item 2. Consider approving a request to rezone approximately 0.737 acres from Douglas County Clustered Preservation District to single dwelling residential at 820 North Minnesota Street. And I believe Sandy is here to speak on this.
Good evening, Commissioner. Sandy Day, planning staff. This item is for rezoning. The property is located on the southeast corner of what is Minnesota Street and Riverside Drive, or E1338 and N1770 Road. It is part of a rural residential subdivision that was originally platted back in the 60s. The lots tend to be an acre or almost an acre in size, and each of the lots was provided with individual on-site sewage disposal. Over time, many of these lots have had failing septic systems and have petitioned the city for annexation to allow for connection to municipal services, and that's the case here. The applicant petitioned the city for annexation at the end of last year. It is less than 10 acres and did not require action by the Planning Commission. City Commission did annex the property, and upon annexation, the current county zoning of CP clustered preservation is no longer appropriate, and the applicant is seeking rezoning to an appropriate city designation. There is no existing approved neighborhood plan or area plan for this area. It is characterized by platted residential lots on individual residential homes on individual lots, and the applicant is seeking that same zoning to RS10 which is found immediately to the south and reflective of generally kind of these larger lots in this general area. Happy to answer any questions. I haven't had any conversation with the applicant in a couple of weeks, so I'm not certain that they are on the call, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. David Carter, Chair. I'll ask, is the applicant here to speak to this? And if so, would you care to amend Sandy's presentation? All right. Getting no response, I'll ask, are there members of the public who would like to speak on this? You know the drill. Please raise your hand and I'll ask Kyle to confirm whether there's anyone in the chambers.
Kyle Kobe with planning. I can confirm that there are no people in the chambers to speak on this item, nor are there any hands going up on Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. With that, I'll turn it over to the commission for questions to Sandy. Commissioner Ashworth.
This is Commissioner Ashworth. Just one question. I can see from the map that the RS10 designation does match the surrounding area. But just given that we are talking a lot these days about infill, is there a reason that this might not have gone to RS7 to match the eastern zoning designation?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. We talked briefly with the applicant about both of those options. I think they feel more connected to their neighbors to the south, somewhat slightly larger lots. There's enough land area that actually I believe those lots could be further subdivided for an additional lot. Depending on how things are laid out, the location of the existing house may or may not allow for an easy division of that property, depending on what happens. There wasn't a significant sway one way or the other for the applicant's opinion. So I think really just their, like I said, connection to their neighbors to the south, they went that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. David Carter, Chair. Other questions? I guess I have a question, maybe kind of a procedural question. When we do have, rural land or, unincorporated land annexed, and it's got a rural zoning designation, is it not a sort of automatic administrative action to assume an urban zoning designation? And what role does the resident typically have in appealing for a particular designation?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. City Code requires that the property be rezoned upon annexation, and usually the property owner is given, I believe it's about 3 months to initiate that rezoning, or the city commission or staff can direct that initiation to rezone. And then many times, if we don't know a lot about what's going on, we would consider using the UR urban reserve zoning district. So it's never been automatic. It still takes action to rezone.
Very good. Thank you, Sandy. David Carter, Chair. Other questions from commissioners or motions? No one has any further questions? Commissioner Sinclair.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. If no one else has any comments or wants to take this one, I'm happy to make a motion.
Please.
I move that we approve the request to rezone approximately 0.737 acres from CP Cluster Preservation District to RS10, Single Dwelling Residential District, based on the findings presented in the staff report and forwarding it to the City Commission with that recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. David Carter, Chair. Do I have a second? Commissioner Sands, thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Commissioner Sands, actually do have a question for staff on this one.
Could I just, before you ask that, could I just ask for clarification? Did you raise your hand to ask the question or to second the motion?
I raised my hand to ask the question, but
Okay, thank you.
I
Just
can
thank you.
second it
Just
too.
okay, it's fine. Thanks for the clarification. Please continue.
No, I'll wait. If someone else wants a second, I'll hold my question until after the.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Just out of abundance of caution, would any other commissioners wish to second Commissioner Sinclair's motion? Commissioner Struckhoff, thank you. Now, Commissioner Sands, please go ahead.
Okay, a question for staff. So the rest of the neighbors that are in that clustered preservation, they are not. If this is a question for clarification, they're not requesting rezoning, correct? I'm sorry, they're not requesting annexation.
Sandy Day, Planning Office. That is correct. The annexations within both the Millers and Wells acres subdivisions, these rural subdivisions in this area, they have not unanimously approached the city for annexation. It seems to be a lot by lot request based on the need for a sanitary sewer connection. City staff has been looking at this area, and extending sanitary sewer is quite the project. So it's something that is on staff's radar, and acknowledgement that ultimately it will happen. But at this point, it's been based on property owner request and based on need.
So the surrounding areas, I mean, there's it's surrounded nearly on all sides by city-owned property. RS7 on the east, RS10 on the south, RS7 on the south, RM, IG. Is it the city's plan to extend city water and sewer out to this single property, or how does the future of this project look?
So this property, and I believe most of the residents in this area may have some form of municipal water service to their lots. What they do not have unanimously throughout the subdivisions is access to sanitary sewer. Getting sewer to all of these lots in this area is complicated. It is something that city engineers have been looking at, how to run that, how to finance that, what kind of easements need to be acquired. So it's kind of been, like I said, lot by lot as it's been coming through. The two lots to the south, the two RS10 zoned lots, those had that same situation where they had failing septic system and were able to connect relatively easy to city sanitary sewer. Same thing for this property. They can connect fairly easily to municipal services for sanitary sewer. There is not a plan in place today on how all of that area would be sewered. It is something that city staff has been looking at. They have just not developed that plan fully. I think there may be some resistance from property owners. If their septic systems are not failing, they're not particularly anxious to annex and bear the brunt of some of that cost of what the sanitary sewer extension is going to look like.
Well, Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner. So, I mean, I guess I would assume that when it comes time for each individual property owner, they have to weigh out the cost of repairing or replacing their septic with the cost of running city sanitary sewer or city water, if that's the case out there. Right. I'm not sure if I'm gonna vote to approve this or not yet. I'd like to hear some other commissioners' comments on it. I think one of the things that frustrates me about this is the seeming inevitability of it all. And this is kind of the stuff that some of the, this is a scenario that is described at great length in Strong Towns and City Lab and these kinds of articles that are what I thought used to be on the fringe of the planning movement, but now are seemingly becoming more mainstream. And maybe I'm getting indoctrinated to their plans, but this scenario right here is what we are warned against. Kind of enveloping these larger lot developments that are not dense, that are just going to increase cost of providing service to this area that, I mean, everything surrounding it is zoned one way, and this is it's not dense, and it's not going to provide a sustainable fiscal solution for providing required services. So that's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. David Carter, Chair. Are there other comments on this item? Commissioner Carpenter, please.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. I just have a question for staff. For those of planning commissioners that have never had a septic system, how do you know when your septic system is failing and when you might have to make this decision?
I don't know if David Carter, Chair, I'm not sure if Sandy's accessible. I'm seeing her image frozen right now. I don't know if that's something that maybe someone else on staff could answer, or maybe Commissioner Willie.
It's an open question. I mean, when I drove out there, it felt like I was driving into a neighborhood that my parents moved us into in 1966, which was, I then realized, a rural subdivision at the time, with septic symptoms, where I helped lay the lines and everything on most of the houses around us with my dad. So I know the answer. I'm just curious if the rest know the answer, and I don't want to answer it. So.
Commissioner Willie, would you care to enlighten the rest of us?
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. Yes, it's because your neighbors start complaining because they can smell it. So it's an overflow. It's on a day like this where the ground is saturated, we got more rain. You can bet that the neighbors are well aware that the septic system has failed. So of course I'm going to vote in favor of this because it's a health issue, and you couldn't get a permit to put a septic system on a 1 acre lot or less than 1 acre lot now if you wanted to. It's only there because it's grandfathered in. Health department will allow a septic system and a well on 5 acres, a septic system and city water or county water on 3 acres. And this is less than 1 acre. It's a health issue, and I think we need to pass it.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. David Carter, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Sands' observation. Where I see eye to eye with him on this is from the standpoint of new subdivisions on the urban fringe. This is this kind of challenge is the one that I think we're trying to prevent, moving forward. So I recognize and acknowledge that doesn't stand in the way of my desire to vote in favor of this. Any other commissioners care to comment, or Commissioner Sands, are you satisfied, or?
The additional Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner, the additional information provided by Commissioner Willie, which kind of explained that through various regulations, the homeowner's been put in a pinch that is basically being forced into this position. I have a different outlook on it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands.
I have the same outlook, but I'll vote for it because of what Karen said.
Understood. Thank you, Commissioner Sands. David Carter, Chair. Other comments or questions? All right. Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. That brings us to item 3. Consider approving a text amendment to revise the subdivision regulations for Lawrence and the unincorporated areas of Douglas County to accommodate the Eudora urban growth area per the interlocal agreement approved by the Board of County Commissioners. And I believe Mary is going to present on this.
Good evening, Mary Miller, City County Planner. And I'll just share my screen. I just have a brief presentation. The City of Eudora has been working with the Board of County Commissioners to establish an urban growth area through an interlocal agreement. And the final steps of getting this established is one, to have the Attorney General sign the interlocal agreement and return it, and two, to make these revisions to the subdivision regulations. They had certain standards they wanted to apply in their urban growth area. And so this text amendment is just taking care of one of those last items. This graphic shows the proposed urban growth area for Eudora. Tier 1 is everything within the city limits, and there are also island rural properties within this tier that are completely surrounded by city. Tier 2 is shown in yellow, and this is where the text amendment would apply. The city would like to prohibit land divisions through the subdivision regulations in this tier, except for divisions that can be accomplished as exemptions from the subregs. And exemptions would include things such as agricultural divisions for agricultural use, for cemetery purposes, for right-of-way or easements, boundary, correction surveys. Also, in the Ag 1 district, we have the agricultural subdivision boundary survey, which is an exemption. It allows you to divide 20-acre parcels. You can't go below that. And then there's certain standards that you need to meet. And that's an extension or exemption. And in Ag 2, there's a homestead exemption, which means if there was a home on the property before 2006, it could be divided off, provided it's compliant with the standards in Ag 2 district. These can all be accomplished as exemptions. They go through the zoning and codes office. They don't go through the planning office or come to you for those divisions. Specifically, they want to prohibit divisions through certificates of surveys or plats or minor subdivisions. There is one exception that they're willing to make. There are some properties in this tier 2 that have been platted, and some of them are preliminary platted but not final platted. And so they would leave that option open, that if someone wanted to replat those, to either reconfigure the lots or divide them, if Eudora did not feel it was necessary for them to annex at the time, those divisions might be able to move forward. And so section 20-803 of the subregs, which are section 11-103 county code, is being revised or proposed to be revised to include this prohibition. The language currently has a restriction or a prohibition on land divisions in service area 1 of the Lawrence urban growth area, which was land very close to the city of, it actually, I believe, included Miller's Acres and Wells Acres that you were just speaking of. Service area 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 no longer exist. Plan 2040 replaced those with tiers. And so it'll just be a cleanup while we're in that section making this change for Eudora. We would just remove the language about Lawrence's urban growth area. So this is the proposed language. No division of land in tier 2 of the Eudora urban growth area shall be approved until the land proposed for division has been annexed into the city of Eudora, with the following exceptions. The first being anything that's an exemption from this regulations, and the second one being that there could be an exemption for property that has been preliminary or final platted, provided the city of Eudora determines they don't need to be annexed at this time. And staff worked with the city manager, Barik Matit, and with the planning consultant to develop this language. And I believe the city manager is present. He's said he would be here to answer questions, but he didn't really intend to make a presentation. And so staff recommends forwarding this amendment to the county commissioners with a recommendation for approval. And as this subregs are a joint document, this would also be placed on the city commission's consent agenda for consideration. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any for me.
Thank you very much, Mary. David Carter, Chair. Mr. Matip, would you care to make any additional comments on this item?
Good evening, Commissioner. This is Barak Matita, City Manager of Eudora. No, I did not have any additional comments to add. This is a conversation that started back in 1980, and I've been working with the county and Lawrence staff to work on this. And I'm just glad that we're finally, finishing up a project that started back in 1980.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mattit. Commissioners may have some questions to mine your knowledge of history at some point in the future. I guess I should ask, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this item? Again, please raise your Zoom hand, and I will ask Kyle to please confirm if there's anyone in the council chambers.
Kyle Kobe, planning, there's nobody here, and right now I don't see any of those Zoom hands going up.
Very good. Thank you, Kyle. With that, I'll turn it back over to the commission for questions to Mary or to Mr. Matee. Commissioner Willie.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. So my question is either for staff or Mr. Matee, whoever would care to take this, but why is there no public comment? There are a lot of landowners that are affected by this, and and it's already had quite a process before it came to us. Usually those things kind of compound, we get the public comment that went to other boards before us, but I'm just curious because this is the sort of thing that should make some people want to be heard or ask questions. I want to make sure we've done all our public process right.
And David Carter, Chair, please, Mary or Mr. Matee, feel free to speak up.
Commissioner, this is Barack Matee. Mary, I didn't know if you had any comments to it, but what I wanted to share is we did have this conversation with our planning commissioners and also with our city commission as well. And there's plenty of opportunity for us to receive public comment during those discussions. And there were actually property owners that were interested and had approached the county in terms of our UGA. So we were working with those property owners that had expressed interest in us finalizing our UGA. So we were intimately keeping them in as far as what the process was and what we were doing. So throughout the process from the city side, we had the planning commission level opportunity for public comment, and also at the city commission level for public comment as well.
Thank you, Mr. Matee. David Carter, Chair, do you have other questions from the commission? Commissioner Sinclair, do I not see your hand going up?
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner, you did not see my hand going up. But I guess I would echo Commissioner Willie's question. That was the first thought that came to my mind for something that in practice has a pretty strong effect of curtailing people's rights with respect to their property in Tier 2. I don't know what to make of it, but I'm surprised that there aren't more people that are, sort of raising hell or whatever. So I second that. I don't have any concerns about, I guess, the notice and whether or not that was all complied with. It's just an interesting phenomenon, I feel like, on this, that there is not a single public comment to come along with this.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. David Carter, Chair. Other questions, observations? I guess I would ask Mr. Matee to maybe walk us through a typical scenario where we would actually expect annexation and subdivision to take place under, what are your anticipated desired steps that you would like to see subdivision take place under?
Commissioner, this is Barack Matee, City Manager of Eudora. I'd probably rely on Mary to be able to describe that process, because any application that they receive comes to us, and we've had a pretty good working relationship that whenever they receive an application, they confirm or they will reach out to us to ask us some questions, especially if it's within Tier 2. And we'd be able to have a discussion and look at the pros and cons, and also discuss with the property owners, and then advise them of what the process looks like, and then provide any other guidance that they might need to be able to help them make a decision whether they should move forward with their subdivision that they have in mind and whether annexation might be of importance. I know as a city, we have some subdivision developments around our city limits that have been there, and similar to some of the conversations that you all had earlier about developments basically being developed around the city limits, we were trying to curtail that because it becomes somewhat difficult to provide the needed infrastructure utilities for those developments whenever they would ask for. So for us, it starts with Mary reaching out and then us having conversation with the property owners and then discussing the pros and cons and providing some guidance as far as what they might need to be able to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Matip. David Carter, Chair. Mary, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Mary Miller, City County Planner. We've been working on this for over a year, and zoning and code staff and myself have gone to the Planning Commission meeting and the City Commission meeting in Eudora, and they've explained the reason they want to limit the growth in the urban growth area is they want to be able to annex and provide the services. Right now, they often provide water, and when people develop, they don't want to annex later, and it kind of hampers their ability to grow. And they originally had a much larger urban growth area, and the county commission worked with them to get it smaller because they wanted it, if you had to annex before you develop, it needed to be a smaller area. So it's reasonable to assume it's going to be annexing before long. So we're not putting land that's 3 miles away and saying you can't develop, and it could be 40 years before it annexes. So the boundary of the urban growth area really shrunk. And on that graphic I showed you, there was a red outline. And that's an area that is not currently in the urban growth area, but that's where they let the county commission know they may want to expand into that. But Barack could let you know that they did have a very large urban growth area planned at first, but just knowing that annexation was going to be required before you could actually subdivide and develop, the area just seemed too large. It wasn't reasonable to expect that. And so they had their utilities department go through and look at where they reasonably could expect to extend services. And so the area that's within tier 2, they indicated they thought they would be able to provide services within a reasonable short time. So they're not trying to put a prohibition on development that's just stopping it. They just want to manage it and be able to provide services and take them into the city.
Thank you, Mary. David Carter, Chair. I think Commissioner Willie, please.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I think this is smart. I think it's a good way forward. I think it's a good answer for the city of Eudora. I think we should probably look at a model similar to this moving forward. I do have a question though about notice. So usually within 3 miles of the city of Baldwin or the city of Eudora, presumably Lecompton too. I guess we have had something in that region. And if anything in the county unincorporated area happens there, then it triggers a joint meeting or a request for information from the planning commission of that city. Will that boundary, that 3 mile radius still occur, still trigger that? Or would this now shrink back to that urban growth area that's proposed?
Mary Miller, Planner. That 3 mile area will still be there. That's in county code. So anytime a project comes before the Planning Commission, there will be a joint Eudora Planning Commission meeting possible if they attend. So that's not going to be changed at all.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Commissioner Willie. I'm glad Commissioner Willie spoke up first because I was going to say I think this is eminently sensible. And I intend to support it, but would any other commissioners choose to ask any questions, speak up? And if there are no other questions, I'd certainly accept a motion. Commissioner Struckhoff.
Eric Struckhoff, Planning Commissioner. I move that we approve the proposed amendment, TA 21-00090, revising the subdivision regulations for Lawrence and the unincorporated areas of Douglas County to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckoff. David Carter, Chair. Do I have a second? Commissioner Willie. Any further discussion? And Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. That brings us to item 4. Receive and provide guidance on the 2022 to 24 planning work plan and forward to the Douglas County Board of, excuse me, well, we're finished. I don't need to read the entire thing. Jeff, I believe you're going to present on this.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. The work plan is something that you usually see as part of your orientation, but given the slight shuffle that we've had in the last year, given your meeting and some of the other things going on, additionally the additional staff being added to the planning division, we wanted to bring the work plan back to you a little bit later so we could accommodate all those requests. So you can kind of see in the work plan, we're lining out a 3-year work plan in there. And two things to really note on that one is that this accommodates some of those neighborhood and sector area planning requests that we've had over the years. And because of the change in the staffing that was approved by the City Commission, we think we can start accommodating, for the lack of a better description here, a city plan and a county plan, each one for next 2 for next 3 years. So they would be a total of 6 in the works going in for the next 3 years at this point in time. So this would allow us to kind of meet those needs from our current planning efforts, so the plans and the site plans and the projects that you see on a monthly basis, but also allow us to have that capacity and ability to get out and start doing the long-range planning that we all recognize as being critical to the environments and the neighborhoods and items of those. So that kind of is the work plan in its nature there. You'll notice that this is very similar to some of the items and goals and things that you had noted in your 2019 orientation session. So we did kind of carry those forward and provide those kind of a good streamlined timeline that we think we can meet as part of that. I also wanted to note, just for the commission and for the public's sake there, we also put a table in there of the ones that are currently underway and when we're estimating their completion status to be, so you can kind of see of what that workload currently looks like for staff. So just kind of a very brief overview of the work plan, and be happy to answer any questions the commission has on the item.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Do I have any members of the public who would like to speak up on this? So please use Zoom to
Raise your hand, and I will ask Kyle if there are any members or any members of the public in the commission chamber.
Kyle Kobe with Planning. There are no people in the commission chamber to speak on this item, and I don't see any digital hands at this point either.
Thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. I'll turn it over to the commission then for questions to Jeff about the work plan. I guess I'll start off by asking.
Kyle Kobe with Planning. I think we do have one person who wishes to speak on this.
Oh, forgive me. Ms. Joyce, please, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I couldn't find my hand button. So good evening. I'm Holly Joyce. I'm co-chair for the Schwegler Neighborhood Association. And at this time, we just wanted to voice our support for the 23rd Street land use and neighborhood study. Our neighborhood spans the north stretch of 23rd Street from Naismith to Iowa. And throughout this section, there are currently 10 vacant commercial properties. These properties are in various conditions, ranging from the brand new former Sprint store to a burnt down former restaurant. The recent vacancies have filled with less than desirable businesses, and it's our hope that the completion of this study can provide our residents with businesses that are compatible and ones that support positive growth in our community. We feel that with businesses starting to reopen, we feel time is the essence to determine the best use for these vacant spaces and the study along 23rd Street. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Joyce. Appreciate your comments. David Carter, Chair. I should give adequate time to ask if there are any other members of the public, and if it's too difficult to find the Zoom hand, we are a fairly small group, so please feel free to raise your hand. Very good. Well, thank you. And with that, I will go ahead. Thank you. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the commission for questions and comments. And while people decide what they want to say, Commissioner Ashworth, please.
Commissioner Ashworth, the public comment brought to mind, we have someone here that was speaking on behalf of the Schwegler neighborhood. I'm wondering if there has been recent contact from the neighborhoods. I noticed that some of these requests for planning are quite old, so I'm wondering if there have been recent conversations with the neighborhood. There's been, of course, a lot of turnover, I imagine, in the neighborhood governance or neighborhood activity, and wondering if that has changed any of the prioritization of these neighborhood plans.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. We did have some
discussions kind of recently about maybe a few months ago, but it may be a little bit longer since time has kind of lost some meaning lately, with the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association, and that's why you see that plan kind of being prioritized higher on that one. We've also had some discussions with the Pinckney area plan and related to some discussion at City Commission, and that's why that one has also been moved up to 2023, I believe, on the list there. Usually the neighborhoods have been very good, even as as the presidents change and as the leaderships have changed over time, to let us know if they're still interested or if they're not interested. So we're pretty sure the list that we have is still the neighborhoods that are interested at the moment. But we're always keeping an ear out and having discussions with neighborhoods if they are still interested or if they would like to, in some discussions, maybe to pool and have 2 or 3 neighborhoods be reviewed at the same time. So we're always open to having those discussions. But we think the list as it is currently prioritized, the list that we currently have prioritizes in that same line that we've been having those discussions.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. I know you mentioned that this was brought up
in the wake of city budget accommodations of staffing increases. Can you tell what the sort of staffing contingencies are in your ability to deliver on this timeline?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director.
Commissioner, I'm not sure I quite understand your question.
Forgive me. So thank you for asking for more specifics. I guess I'm asking, do you, in order to, so what kind of staffing changes do you need to
make in order to achieve this timeline? Like how many staff positions do you need to fill, and how long does that take?
Certainly, Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director.
The commission recently approved the addition of 3 planners and a planning technician to join the planning division staff, and that would give us the capacity to carry out the work plan that we have here. So that's why you start seeing kind of that pickup in the items in 2022. That would allow us time to go through the hiring process and give the new staff some time to settle in and get used to those items before we really go out and start doing a lot of that big, heavy workload of items. So generally, we're very hopeful to have that process getting underway in the very near future. We're just got to get some of the loose ends tied up, and then we can begin working to recruit for those position openings.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. That's really helpful.
Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Ashworth.
This is Commissioner Ashworth. I may be getting ahead of myself. When I reviewed this document, I'm looking for it now. There's sort of an echo. Is that interfering? No, okay. It's somewhere in here, when I reviewed it previously, was a mention of updating the land use development code to match or to take into consideration Plan 2040. And I know there was a mention of that in here somewhere. I can't find it. Can you give us an idea of how is that going to be a little piece of most of these steps, is updating the land use development code as we go along through this work plan?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Commissioner Ashworth, I'm not sure if it's
This memo or if it was in a memo that was at City Commission, but staff is anticipating and hoping to initiate a revision to the land development code to kind of help it bring back in line with Plan 2040. Also help it line up more with what we're seeing for the community's asks for affordable housing, sustainability, and some of those other planning efforts that we've had in the area here. So it would be separate from this item, but we would envision it going on at the same time. At the moment, well, we're anticipating that to be a consultant-led process. That way it can be done at some speed and have some dedicated time to it there. If it was a staff-led process, I'm afraid it might be drawn out a little longer. So we're hoping to have that process be led by a consultant and coming online. So we didn't include it in the work plan since it was not necessarily staff-driven, but it is something that we are looking for and trying to prioritize at the moment.
Commissioner Ashworth, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. David Carter, Chair. Other questions, observations from commissioners? Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. I was glad to hear the word consultant coming from Jeff, because I believe the new positions added to the planning department are making this possible to do the neighborhood plan and area plans concurrently, at least touching on some each year. And, as I look at the highest priority, for 2022, looking at the annexation policies, I think I know we need to do that quick, but it's not going to help us if we still have zoning that allows lots that are much too large to be incorporated into the city in a fiscally responsible way. So I'm glad to hear that there is talk of having a consultant work on that land development code so that we can have these mesh more appropriately, because we already have conflicting rules out there. And as we go, we're only going to create more conflicts if we can't get a lot of this done at the same time. So Jeff, how firm is it that there's actually going to be a consultant brought in to work on the land use code, land development?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. It's still very early days on that front. We're still working to identify the funding and get that process initially scoped out. But right now we're holding to that as the choice course to go forward on that one, because a zoning code is one of those things that can take up a lot of time, and you have to put a lot of resources and effort into them. But the other side of that is it's not a process you want to elongate in time. You want to have it kind of go very, very quickly in some regards. That way people have expectations and they know that it's moving forward, has some delineated steps to it. So what you tend to see nowadays is those code rewrites will, get started and they might linger for 2 to 3 years to kind of go through the input, the analysis, the studying, and then the drafting phases. And that we're really hoping to bring a consultant on board that could bring that to a close in a couple of years very quickly. But don't have too much detail on the timeline or what that looks like at the moment, but we're still in the early days of kind of getting that scoped out and get that foundation settled for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Other questions?
Any other specific, Commissioner Struckhoff, please.
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckhoff. I was also gratified to hear that the consultant was being brought in, especially for the land use revisions. After all, and not only is our new comprehensive plan a very high-level view of our planning desires and a statement of our wishes as a community, but we did leave behind some of that code-like language, and so that is partly what's brought about the need to have these revisions done. In addition to that, the goals set by this commission, by our city and county commissions, through our comprehensive plan are also very high. And so I am very, very proud of the planning staff and the city commission and county commissions who have chosen to add these positions to the planning staff to make these changes possible, to make them quickly, and to do them thoroughly. And so I'm very grateful that our governing bodies have seen fit to accommodate these very demanding tasks that are placed on the planning staff. So thanks to them too.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckoff. David Carter, Chair. Other questions? Or would Commissioner, I'm sorry, Commissioner Sinclair.
Thank you, Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. I mean, with work plans and the various things that are out there, I think there are a lot of competing interests and I guess factions that would want things to be worked on sooner than later. And so it's a hard task, I think, for planning staff to come up with a work plan. But I just wanted to, we're commending the governing bodies for adding staff, but I do want to commend Jeff and planning staff for putting together this work plan. I feel like it balances well the various things that we're trying to do. And it's the things that Planning Commission has indicated are priorities to us are, I'm sure, different than other commissions for the city and county even. And I'm proud of this work plan, and I feel like it's exciting to see. It seems like there's a lot to tackle, and I look forward to seeing the product from all this. So thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. David Carter, Chair. Jeff, you're welcome to respond to that if you like.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. I have to give all the credit to the staff on helping us get this work plan together, because they've been very clear about what's capable and what they're seeing as the issues popping up. And we've had some discussions about it, but it's all credit due to staff on that they're willing to not just meet that current planning workload that we have, but also step up to the plate and go for those long range items that we all see as being key community values. So we think it's a good work plan. We think we had it balanced pretty well between kind of making sure that we could meet all those demands and the current planning efforts that we had going on, but also allow us to kind of stretch out and go into that long range planning that we all really would like to see some traction on. So I got to give some credit to staff on that one. It's definitely not all one person on that. It's going to be a team effort to get this conducted and underway.
Great.
Thanks, David Carter, Chair. I guess it's been a while since we've had a work plan. I know the past year has been really disruptive, but assuming we're able to get back to a normal pace, what should we expect in the future? Do we revisit this on an annual basis for amendments? What does this look like 1 year from now or 18 months from now? Can you remind us?
Jeff Crick, Planning
Services Director. Certainly, we would like to bring this back to you annually. That way you could see, the progress that we've made, or if there's been a project that maybe has gotten a little bit stuck in the weeds or something like that that's come up where there's been some things that have popped up. Obviously, the work plan for 2020 was almost rendered moot by the pandemic and some of the things going on. But what we would like to do is bring this back to you every year and also to the governing bodies every year, just to show the progress that we're doing, and then also make sure that we're still prioritizing the things in the right order and that something hasn't shifted around a little bit in the community that the commissions are seeing that needs to be adjusted. So we would like to bring it back kind of on your normal schedule, which would be right around your orientation, if possible. And so that would be our hope at the moment.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Any
other questions from commissioners or perhaps motions? Commissioner Shanklin.
Hi, Greg Shanklin, Planning Commissioner. I see in the margin notes that a number of the priorities are referred to as having been suggested by the Planning Commission. I'm curious about how that process works Jeff, if I could hear from you on that, but also I think the item that concerns me the most in the prioritization is the evaluation of ag and environmentally sensitive lands, and it's scheduled for 2023. That issue in particular has come up in, this month is an exception, it seems. And I think that if there were a way to move that up in the prioritization, that would be a great thing to do. And I mean, just generally speaking, I don't know that this is the place to comment, but I'd like to know when is a place to comment about priorities.
Jeff Craig,
Development Services Director. Commissioner Shanklin, I think this is the moment to comment about those priorities. I think this is kind of the feedback that we're looking for this evening, is to kind of make sure we're getting those it's slotted correctly for the right years. And one thing I might have to ask Becky to give me a hand on, because I was not available for the setting in 2019 for those priorities. I was actually absent during that time, but it was what we did at the Planning Commission orientation to kind of line out as this, what were the commissions identifying as the high and the medium and the low priorities, and the things that were in Plan 2040 that we wanted to have that come through. And that was a part of the orientation session back in 19, which was the last time we could all meet together, and it was at the County Commission building. So I think Becky's giving me the indication I got it right there on that one. But again, I wasn't at that meeting, unfortunately, but it was really that orientation session that sets that prioritization that we had here. But again, we've got that as a note, and we'll take a look at that and put that forward for the consideration going forward if the commission finds that to be important.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Shanklin, do you have any follow-up questions or commentary on that?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay, not at all. Thank you. So I guess I do have a follow-up question to Jeff about this, just as an example. When we look at 2022, the items that are on there, they've been identified as high priority. The only one that I see that's not really explicitly mentioned, that's not a land use plan and not mentioned as high priority, is the stream buffer ordinance. And not to single this one out, but just from a project planning perspective, I'm curious about a little bit of the nuts and bolts of something like this. I assume that you've got sort of resource estimates for each one of these things. And when you've got to juggle the priorities, you've got to look at, by moving one thing up, you're going to be displacing something else. And I'm just curious, as an example, the item that Commissioner Shanklin called attention to versus something like the stream buffer ordinance, what does that look like in terms of the investment of staff time?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. That one has kind of been tandemed with a couple of other things that have been going on, more with municipal services and operations, but also we've been playing a pretty active role in that too. So that one's more of a partnership than a Planning and Development Services alone initiative that's driving that one. So that one has the possibility to kind of move around, and it may also turn out as we start developing the programs that help underpin that, and that initial thing is we might need to revise that one around a little bit. That looks like I also didn't include in there that was also identified in Plan 2040 as a priority. I don't believe it was identified by the Planning Commission as a priority, but it has been something that city staff has identified as being kind of valuable, and some of the work that we've been doing on that front. But it is possible to move that one around. And I should note that on 2022, the 23rd Street Land Use and Neighborhood Study is actually a funded consultant study that was actually scheduled for 2020. We actually couldn't go forward with it during the pandemic, so it got moved into the next budget year. So we think that one will be a consultant-led one that will get initiated, we think, starting in 2022. So that one won't be necessarily a resource task on staff other than managing the project as a whole, but it would be a consultant-led item that we were hoping to do in the spring of 2020 that we just couldn't do for a couple obvious reasons there, so.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair.
Other questions from commissioners? Anyone else want to ask about specific priorities? Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, just because you picked on the stream buffer ordinance, Commissioner Carter, as I understand that one, and correct me if I am wrong, Jeff, but that one has been in development now for a few years, 2 or 3 years. And it strikes me as that something that could actually get done. And it is in a cooperation with municipal services. And it sounds like something that's just kind of on the precipice of being completed. Now, it might, other things that are coming up may change that a little bit, but that seems to me like within the grasp of getting done. And so I would put that personally as a priority. But as if I'm incorrect in that assessment, Jeff, please do correct me.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development
Services Director. Correct. We started that kind of all the way back, I believe, in August or September of 2018, and kind of got that ball rolling. So we're hopeful that it's on its last lap, if you will. We think it's getting close to getting through the process there, but knowing the complexity of those, we're banking on it and kind of going through in 2022. There's also a lot of things that have to happen kind of along the way before that one can really reach its end, and we're wanting to make sure that we get all those kind of foundation stones set in place before we get to it. But it's I had to look back, and I believe I actually wrote the initiation memo back in August of 2018. So it's been with us for a little while, and we've had staff doing some good work on it. It's just been a little little hopscotched, if you will, in trying to do that as some of the priorities have shifted around and trying to keep up with some of the changing in priorities in the last year. But we think we were in that last lap with it, honestly.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth, David Carter, Chair. And
As I said, I wasn't trying to pick on that specific item. Part of my point was just that by rearranging priorities, it will inevitably have to displace something as we move something up. But other questions, observations from commissioners? Commissioner Shanklin, you look like you may want to say something.
Greg Shanklin, Planning Commissioner. I do have one more request. I noticed that we've relegated increased height and density to 2024 with a reference that it's a medium priority. And given the city and county's need for housing production, in particular affordable housing production, it seems to me that increased height and density are of paramount importance. And so I would urge that we find a way to move that up the ladder as high as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Shanklin. David Carter, Chair. Jeff, would you care to say anything on that? I mean, I think I recognize Commissioner Shanklin's observation. I think considering we have not actually discussed item on the work plan since specific items since probably October of 2019, it's fair to say that that recommendation was made without the benefit of some of the items that have come before us recently. But would you care to say anything to that, Jeff?
Jeff Crick,
Development Services Director. Some of these items I think may also get picked up and done as part of that consultant-led code rewrite process, so that it might get expedited as part of that as something else. So some of these might get reshuffled as that revision process gets a little bit more focused in, and we get to understand what that scope looks like. So I think it's a great item to note. I think it's something we see at Planning Commission quite frequently. But I could also see that one kind of getting wrapped up into a broader discussion about the development code as a whole, too. So it may get expedited as part of that process. Like I said, though, don't quite have all the details yet, so I can't promise anything at that stage.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Looks like Commissioner Carpenter wanted to say something. Forgive
Me
me.
if I overlooked you.
Well, I
You
was just gonna,
accidentally raised your hand.
whatever I'm doing here. Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. Yeah, I was just gonna try to get my hand up before you sent that to Jeff, but I think Jeff covered what my question was gonna be, is some of these items that are listed here should be coming up when we look at the updating the land development code, because there is a huge tedious section in the land development code about height and density standards. And I think a lot of things are going to be addressed in there, and including, I hope, a discussion about our zoning categories and whether we go with.
Kyle Kobe with Planning. Commissioner Carpenter, you have become muted.
Yeah, isn't Zoom great? Yeah, I was just going to say there's going to be so many issues that come up as the community gets into discussing updating the land development code, including the height and density. And I hope that part of the conversation at that time will also include, lot sizes. I mean, are we just going to do our current zoning categories where, we designate RS7, but it can be half acre lots, which is what we have in some areas now? Or are we going to really re-examine what's going to happen with greenfield development or, redeveloping in tier 1? So I probably won't be on the commission when we finally get around to having that come back to the planning commission, but I'm sure looking forward and being part of the conversation as we get into that. And I hope everybody that's here that's going to be leaving the commission by the time it gets to that discussion will participate, because I think everybody that's been on the planning commission has valuable observations that can go into that.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. David Carter, Chair. Jeff, did you care to respond, or?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. Now I think Commissioner Carpenter capped it very succinctly there. So.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Any other
Questions, observations from planning commissioners? Or any motions? Commissioner Sinclair.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. I guess more of a point of order. Do we need to make a motion on this, or is this simply Jeff and staff taking our comments and running with them?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. We definitely been keeping notes on the comments there. Given the format of the meeting, if you'd like to just take a motion to, let me get that wording for you, just a motion to recommend forwarding it on to the Board of County Commissioners and City Commission, we'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner Sinclair. I think considering that we haven't asked for any specific changes, that makes sense to me as well. Would anyone care to make a motion, or does anyone have any other additional observations they'd care to make? Commissioner Struckoff.
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff, I'd be happy to make a motion if there's no further discussion.
I believe
I move that we receive and accept the planning work plan and forward to the Board of County Commissioners and the Lawrence City Commissioner for their consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckoff. David Carter, Chair. Do I have a second? Commissioner Ashworth, thank you. Any further discussion? Commissioner Shanklin, was that further discussion or seconding? Did you care to say something else?
Just a second.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So do I have any further discussion? Seeing none, Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands? Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
All right, thank you, Jeff. That actually concludes our agenda, oddly. There are a couple of additional items, actually 3 additional items for additional consideration. And before we move on to those, could I just ask Jeff or Becky to clarify the nature of both items F1 and F2, please?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. Item F1 and F2 are plating variances that require the Planning Commission's consideration this evening.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. So just to clarify, we should treat those as if they were part of the regular agenda.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director, correct. It will require a motion for the item to be kind of approved or not approved based on the Commission's item this evening.
Thank you very much.
David Carter, Chair. That brings us to item F1 then. Consider a variance from sidewalk requirements for a minor subdivision located at 3780 Greenway Circle. And I believe Catherine is going to present on this. Oh, I'm sorry, Catherine, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I undid my video, but not my mute. Good evening again, Commissioners. Catherine Week, Planning Staff. I'm going to briefly go through the memo that's attached with this particular miscellaneous item. This is in association with minor subdivision for Plasticon Edition number 1, located at 3780 Greenway Circle. There is a variance requested with this associated minor subdivision to provide sidewalk on both sides of Greenway Circle. So minor subdivisions are processed administratively. However, the Planning Commission approval is required for variances from the subdivision design standards. This minor subdivision is currently under review, but we have attached it for context purposes. So you have a visual of what the variance is being requested associated with this minor subdivision. No other Planning Commission action is required related to the proposed minor subdivision, so you're just considering the variance this evening. So the subdivision regulations state that applicants may make variance requests in accordance with 2813 Section G. This memo provides the background. The variance is to provide sidewalk on both sides of Greenway Circle adjacent to the property as required for collector streets per Section 2811 C1I. The applicant is proposing to consolidate 2 lots and the cul-de-sac right-of-way vacation into 1 lot to accommodate their building expansion. Currently, their production facility is approximately 90,000 square feet in size, and eventually they would be expanding to an additional 200,000 square feet in 2 phases. This property is part of East Hills Business Park, number 3 subdivision. It was platted and recorded in May of 2003. And at the time of platting and development, it was under the previous 1966 zoning code. And subdivision regulations at that time only required sidewalk on one side of the street. The site plan for the property was approved later in that same year. And as properties continue to develop, current regulations and requirements are applied. And because this property will now go through the platting and major site planning processes, current requirements under the code do apply. And so Greenway Circle is classified as a collector street, which requires a 5-foot minimum sidewalk on both sides of the street. There's approximately 1,060 linear square feet of sidewalk that is adjacent to this particular property. So when reviewing subdivision variance requests, there are 3 criteria that we consider. Strict application of the regulations would potentially require an unnecessary hardship upon the applicant. That the request is in conformance with the intent of the code, and that public safety is considered. So development along Greenway Circle consist of industrial uses with building and parking lot setbacks based on the existing property rights of way configuration. As I said, this property is part of the proposed development for Plasticon. Strict application of the code does not require additional dedication of right-of-way, so there are no additional acquiring right-of-way that would be necessary to install the sidewalk. The right-of-way is already there. Again, the property was developed under a previous zoning code that did not require sidewalks on both sides of the street at the time. So in considering that first criteria, staff was of the opinion that this is not an unnecessary hardship upon the applicant. There are no contextual issues on the site that would prohibit installation of the sidewalk, and granting the request from the required sidewalk is opposed to the intentions of the regulation. And there is a specific definition for unnecessary hardship. If you have questions about that definition later, you can ask me. The proposed variance being in harmony with the intent of the regulations, staff also found that it did not meet the requirements for this second criteria. In particular, Greenway Circle, and particularly the stretch of Greenway Circle, is identified in Transportation 2040, Plan T 2040, and which describes the priority network defined in Chapter 6 of that plan. And Greenway Circle is part of that priority network as a collector street. It's planned for not only pedestrian access, but bike access and transit connection points along this strip of Greenway Circle. So in analyzing the criteria 2, staff did not feel that the variance met the criteria set forth for the request. And then public safety. So the intention of the code is always to ensure that public safety welfare is being considered. Staff found that granting the sidewalk variance could impact public health, safety, and welfare, and that the intent of the requirement is to provide public connectivity and amenities equally in all development areas. And that is what the plan T2040 and Plan 2040 emphasize. So staff is recommending denial of this particular variance request for the minor subdivision associated and under MS 21-00116. And based on the criteria and review, staff again is recommending denial. And I would be happy to stand for any questions specific to the criteria or the location or anything else related to the minor subdivision.
Thank you, Catherine. David Carter, Chair. Is the applicant here, and would the applicant care to respond? Is that Mr. Ammon?
Mr. Ammon, yeah,
Ammon,
Darren
yes,
Ammon.
please.
I am Darren Ammon with Bartlett and West, and I am representing the applicant tonight to discuss this. Can I go ahead and give a brief presentation, or would you like to wait?
No, that's fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Chairman, Commissioners, and thanks staff, Catherine, for the presentation. She went through the staff report extremely well. And while the owner is not going to be represented here tonight themselves, we are working with them on the minor subdivision replat, as Catherine mentioned, and some upcoming work. And they did want to emphasize that this is very important to them, and they understand requests like this when you're asking for variances from current codes can be challenging. But due to some unique things within this and some circumstances that we do feel that this is something that we could require a variance, and would like to at least pursue this, or at least discuss some alternatives, but having no sidewalk would be the preference. So I guess to start off with a little bit, the platting process is being done, number one, because Plasticon is looking to do another expansion in the very near future. And we know growing jobs and property taxes and prosperity for the Lawrence residents and the surrounding area is very important. So that's growing their business and helping the community is priority number one. And they're going to have to go through this platting process because they are asking for some vacation of right-of-way, which is a little bit unique and doesn't happen a whole lot because this cul-de-sac, Greenway cul-de-sac, there has been in place for a long time. The lot that is getting combined into what will be Plasticon Addition number 1 has been vacant for decades. And in order for them to proceed with the site plan, the plat needs to go forward. So the context of that is, I know you're not approving the plat tonight, but the point of that is we are going through that process, which does trigger us to do sidewalk on all frontage. And the one thing that's very unique when you think about adding sidewalk, particular instance, is the amount of sidewalk that's being asked to be added. Anytime you're in an industrial zone district, obviously you're dealing with much larger lots. If this was 100 feet, I'd say even a couple hundred feet or so, I wouldn't be before you tonight asking for this, but quite honestly, we're asking for over 1,000 feet of sidewalk to be placed in front of their property when no other surrounding businesses, there's any linkage on the side of Greenway Circle to connect to. And we understand who knows what could happen in the future, but one of the things we wanted to point out, and it's noted in the staff report under criteria 1, that the adjacent property, for instance, Amar Garage Door, went through the process of site planning their property in 1966, which is 45 years ago. So putting 1,065 feet of sidewalk in front of this property when they go through the site plan now certainly could be done. But part of the concern with the owner is, and we know, I'm going to go a little bit off script here, but say dollars cannot be taken into account. We understand when you're talking about variances. But if you take 1,065 feet times 5 foot in width at $6 a square foot, you're talking about a pretty good chunk of dollars to put that in. And an example being with Amar Garage Door not having done anything for 45 years, nor the adjacent property, which is another former farmland piece of property that has been vacant for decades. The chances of that sidewalk actually being built adjacent to this piece of property before they potentially would have to even redo it again because it would be deteriorated is probably fairly great. Because the sidewalk would probably wear out in terms of the time that it could be used. They have a sidewalk, Plasticon has placed a sidewalk connection from their front door out to Greenway Circle, and it does cross the street and provide access to the what I'll call the inner circle of Greenway Circle. There is an entire loop of sidewalk that currently exists around the inner circle of Greenway Circle. And I apologize for saying circle 50 times, but the connection, and I understand one of the criteria with the transportation plan is to provide high quality pedestrian access. And being a landscape architect and planner, 100% agree with that, and we're doing a great job of that in Lawrence. But really the only connection that would need to be made for that to exist right now from Venture Park Drive, where it ties into Greenway Circle, would be one curb cut sidewalk ramp to get folks from Venture Park Drive across Greenway Circle to the inner sidewalk, and you could walk on a sidewalk all the way out to Noria Road today. Don't really necessarily feel that a sidewalk on both sides of the street is an absolute. We clearly understand it is code with the collector criteria as it is with the arterial and so forth. But again, we're asking for a little bit of latitude here because there are a lot of challenges on the project coming up where the owner is going to have to address some things. Again, to be blunt about it, it does cost a lot of money to do some of these things. We don't want this to be about money, but maybe there is another option of denial would be our preference. But if there's something, a note could be put on the site plan, if the other properties adjacent to this develop, they wouldn't be opposed to putting their sidewalk in to then form connections that actually don't lead to nowhere. So that's one of the items I wanted to talk about. So really, I don't think I have a whole lot more than that, and I'd be glad to answer any questions if I talked in circles, no pun intended, to try to clarify some of the points we had. But we would greatly appreciate your consideration of this, appreciate staff's help, and again, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ammon. Really appreciate your observations. David Carter, Chair. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak up? I don't think we have many left, but If so, please raise your Google hand or turn on your camera and actually raise your physical hand. And I will ask Kyle if there's anyone in the commission chamber to speak.
Kyle Kobe with.
There's nobody in the room with us to speak on this item. And so far, I don't see any digital hands going up.
Thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair.
I'll turn it over to the commission then, please, for questions or comments to Catherine or to Mr. Amon. So Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, I was wondering if city staff could address the question that Mr. Amon had, or the proposal that Mr. Amon had about requiring, if I understood this correctly, requiring Plasticon to put a sidewalk in when the other parcels in that section, in that around Greenway Circle, develop, and then would be also be required to put a sidewalk in. What is the sort of legality of that? Is that possible?
Yes, Catherine Week, planning staff, and I apologize if I misheard your question because I'm having horrible connection. So if I misanswered, let me know and I'll clarify. But what I think I heard was why are we requiring, basically why this property would be required to have 1,000 feet of sidewalk and adjacent properties do not, or did not, or would they, as they develop, would they be required? And no, go ahead.
Actually, I was, this Commissioner Ashworth, Mr. Amon brought up the idea that their property that's in front of us tonight would be required to put a sidewalk in only when the other properties develop. And I'm just asking sort of a technical question. Is that even something that could be done, is put that condition on the current question before us tonight?
Well, and Jeff might be able to add to this, but I mean, we do have agreements not to protest when future development is coming if there's not an intended infrastructure project now. This is a different situation in that we have language in the code that requires current development for plating or major site planning processes to come up to current code standards. So that is the trigger currently. And the process under plating is to ask for a variance under the subdivision regulations as a PC variance to basically, that would be their route if there's a way to alleviate from that code section. It would be the PC variance. I don't know that there's really language in the code that would provide us means to put a condition on a site plan, or I guess it would have to be on the site plan, not the plat, but to require them to put their sidewalk in at the time of neighboring properties. I mean, we don't know what that time frame would be. There's a lot of ifs, hypotheticals, and Jeff can maybe clarify, but I'm not sure that the language is in the code to put that kind of condition on a site plan. And Jeff, feel free to speak up if I've misspoken in that regard.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services Director. Catherine is right in that regard, and that you can't typically cross a subdivision regulation with a zoning ask in that sense, which is why you have those kind of straight lines in there. The key to remember with a variance in the subdivision regulations is it's a permission to depart from the design standards or improvement standards when the specific standard is so unreasonable that it would prevent the logical subdivision of the property. So the standard for the variance is that it would inhibit the subdivision from occurring as being the key in there, but you can't really link the subdivision request and ask to the zoning item because they're two separate items that would have to proceed in two different channels.
Thank you, Jeff.
David Carter, Chair. Any follow-up question on that particular item, Commissioner Ashworth?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner, I just wanted to lay that out since that was a request or an idea laid out by the petitioner.
Okay, thank you. David Carter, Chair. I actually have a bit of a historical question for Jeff or for staff about, or for Catherine, forgive me, just for staff. So the change in the code over time. It was not unusual, say in the 60s or the 70s, 80s, for just to require sidewalk on one side. Can you talk a little bit about the rationale behind the change in code? Why we now require sidewalks on both sides? What's the motivation behind that? What are we expecting to happen as a result of that?
Well, Jeff can add to this, but I mean, I believe a lot of that language is in Plan T 2040, where the community has deemed it a priority that we are providing those amenities and connections for pedestrians, bike, and transit, and a way to infill those connection points and that interconnectivity is to have the triggers in the code where major development is happening, those areas that when it wasn't necessarily as high a priority for the community and they only provided sidewalk on one side or certain sections or different types of development projects, that this is the trigger for infilling and providing that level of connectivity that is been deemed a priority for the community, which is what Plan 2040 and Plan T 2040 address. That's basically where that's coming from and how that changes over time. As obviously, as codes develop over time, community priorities have changed over time, and that's where those, those goals and things that you just talked about in the work plan that, have been priorities discussed become codified in plans and zoning codes, and that's where this has come from. So.
Thank you, Catherine. That's really helpful. David Carter, Chair. Jeff, is there anything you wanted to say to
amend that?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. Catherine did a great job. I think the only thing that I'd mention is when we usually talk about our streets and the hierarchy, we've always tried to put an emphasis and focus on multimodal connectivity on our larger thoroughfares, so our collectors and arterials. And my understanding is that code section was brought in to kind of help achieve that multimodal transportation network. We'll have to admit, though, that was a little bit before my time of when that was put into code, but from my understanding, it was mainly to kind of look at that and make sure that we had a holistic multimodal transportation network as we were going and growing.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie.
Erin Willie, Planning Commissioner. Every time we have an industrial property, I have to say how much I like industrial properties and organizations that provide jobs, and I feel a real heart for that because I think it's hard for a community to keep that inventory and to keep supporting businesses and jobs, and so I want to be someone who brings that up. I've always been a fan of the sidewalk on two sides of the street, but we've always been talking about either residential, where you don't want kids on bikes crossing streets if they don't have to get to the sidewalk, or commercial, getting in and out of shops and that kind of connectivity. But as a not very frequent cyclist, but a walker, I see that this in an industrial zoned area with really large lots and being able to walk or bike to work, it looks like the connectivity that's there will really serve very adequately well to get people in and out of those places of business. I know that's not the same thing as saying an unnecessary hardship, which is what our variance is based on, but I'm looking at that and saying that it may not be a thoroughly necessary thing, even for us, even for a community that values that connectivity. It feels like what's with some pretty small changes would make that very adequate. So I throw that out. I just want to hear what other commissioners have to say.
David, thank you, Commissioner Willie. David Carter, Chair. I think Commissioner Sands and then Commissioner Shanklin.
Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner. Quick question for staff. Who built out the Venture Park Drive? Was that a city or was that a joint effort?
I probably have to have Jeff answer that question. I'm assuming it was the city, but I don't know for sure if there was any private funding in there.
Thank you, Catherine. David Carter, Chair. It looks like Mr. Amon might have an answer to that question.
Aaron Ammon, Bartlett West. I guess I can chime in a little bit because I was involved with the master planning and the infrastructure development of Venture Park. And Venture Park Drive and the sidewalks and so forth were all paid for the city of Lawrence, the infrastructure funds, when the road was designed. So that wasn't done by private development. Those lots along Venture Park were put in place during that road design and so forth. So yes.
Thank you, Mr. Ammon. Commissioner Sands?
Yeah, thank you, Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner. Being that that's the only road in this area that's got sidewalks on both sides, and I think it's interesting that it does have sidewalks on both sides, and it serves really only one property to the west side of the whole IG zone. So the additional pedestrian connectivity only serves one building, whereas the built out area doesn't have that same issue. But if I'm inclined to agree with Commissioner Willie, if I were to attempt to run out here or bike out here, whether I was going for work or just simply because the traffic in general in this area, outside of whatever the shift change is pretty low. I've been out here during business hours a couple times. I don't think adding several hundred feet of sidewalk adds to the public safety or the public health. I think having the interior ring of sidewalks is already reasonable. I'm eyeballing some things here. Plasticon has one of the smallest parking lots of the entire of all the tenants of this property. So they're keeping their paved area footprint relatively low, and I know that doesn't have anything directly to do with the issue at hand, but when I see that, I make consideration for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Commissioner Carter Chair. Commissioner, forgive me, I'm going to ask for one moment. Catherine, it looks like you have something to say in response to Commissioner Sands' observation.
Yeah, I was just going to point out, there is a diagram in the staff memo that kind of shows that north portion of Greenway Circle and the connection. And some of the language in T2040 talks about, some of these are priority networks for future development, not just what's currently there. And so that Noria Road connection there with Greenway Circle, that is the connection point to the east. So that is the primary connection point for any future development, transit, pedestrian, bikeway. I mean, there are already bikes, that use that Noria Road connection heading towards Eudora. So just keep that in mind when you're, having your discussion points, that it's not just about what is currently on the development or what is currently located in the subdivision. These are priority networks that are intended for future development as well and future connectivity. So just keep that in mind when you're having your discussion points.
Thank you, Catherine. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Shanklin.
Greg Shanklin, Commissioner. I'd like to join Commissioners Willie and Sands here. This case reminds me a lot of 2300 Lakeview from last November, where we agreed to defer the sidewalk requirement subject to an agreement in the future regarding a benefit district. Is that a possible solution here, where either this property owner could join with others in the maintenance of existing sidewalks or the development of new sidewalks as and when they're needed?
Yeah, staff, Catherine Week, staff, planning staff. I might have Jeff chime in a little bit on this, and it's similar to the question that Sharon Ashworth answered or asked, where yes, there is an agreement not to protest. That is something that is in the code. I'm not sure it's applicable here. They've gone for the PC variance as part of the planning process to get the variance from having to provide the sidewalk, not an agreement not to protest. But Jeff can weigh in on if there's that course of action. I'm not sure I'm explaining it properly, but.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. I was just going to double check something in the code section real quick. Looks like
Jeff, should we give you a little bit of time to look that up while I take another question, or do you?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. That would be fine. That'd give me enough time to fight the computer and make sure it's giving me the right page. I would appreciate
that.
Very good. Thanks. David Carter, Chair. I see Commissioner Payden, Commissioner Payden's hand. I think I also saw Commissioner Ashworth raise her hand earlier. Commissioner Ashworth, do you still have a question?
Just a short one, but please allow Commissioner Payden to go ahead.
Very good. Please, Commissioner Payden.
Yeah, Commissioner Payden. Catherine had just mentioned this is on a priority network. And as someone who serves on Transportation Commission, but us more than that, has served on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Task Force, one thing that came up constantly is sidewalk gaps. And I'm always kind of conflicted about this because I feel like I completely understand why this variance was requested. But when I think about what we keep talking about, how we keep sort of envisioning our future to look and what we see in T2040 and Plan 2040, I feel like it sort of sets a precedent to say, no, we want to continue with our current land use types of plans, and to allow there to be only a sidewalk on one side of the street, when what we're facing in areas that are sort of closer in is there's only a sidewalk on one side of the street because we either allowed a variance or because the code was different. So I am conflicted, but I also feel like maybe it's important for consistency. And because it's on a priority network. There's something else I wanted to say here, but now I'm losing track of what it was. Maybe I'll just have you come back to me.
Sure, that's fine. Please, David Carter, Chair, please feel free to interrupt me or after the next question or comment. So did Commissioner Payden, I should just ask, did you wish for staff response to that?
Well, so the other thing I was going to say is Commissioner Sands had mentioned that it has a very small parking lot. And I know one of the things that came up when there were discussions about redoing 19th Street, which is remaining narrower than maybe people wanted. And I feel like Planning Commission is maybe not, I feel like we saw some stuff on 19th Street, but the whole issue with the size of the street and what the street was going to be is kind of an important conversation to this, that we are, I'm aware of, but we're not really, haven't really talked about on Planning Commission. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, Commissioner Sands brought up that it has a smaller parking lot. And ideally, I think the way we want to see things happen according to T2040 and Plan 2040 is that parking lot can remain small and there will be options for people to do something other than just drive there. I mean, not that that's how it pans out, but I think that's what we're striving for. And so ideally, it's on the priority network. It would have really good connections and wouldn't have things that might be riskier. I mean, I know this isn't an issue right now or concern perhaps, but where you have that skipping across sides of the street because of what's, excuse me, what's out there, you know, people having to switch sides of the street on a bike or on foot where, you know, a car doesn't have to do that. They each have their own side. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Payton. David Carter, Chair, just to come back to whether you want any staff response to that or just making the observation.
Well, I think no, I don't expect a response to that. I just think it's important to consider that there have been all kinds of discussions on Transportation Commission about 19th Street and about that area and about the future development. And I understand the conflict there and saying, is it really necessary to have sidewalks on both sides of the street? But I also think it's important to be consistent and to consider that it's on a priority network. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you very much. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, just I echo the sentiments of Commissioner Payton, and I'm inclined to actually support denial of this variance request because eventually those other properties on the outside of Greenway Circle will eventually also be required to put sidewalks in, and given that this is a priority network, that's what I'm inclined to support denial for this variance request.
Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. David Carter, Chair. Wow. Commissioner Willie.
I have a quick question for either Catherine or Jeff. Are our only options here yes or no? Or do we have it? Because we keep talking about what other options can we come up with, but is that really all we have?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director.
Commissioner Willie, that was a great setup because I was going to kind of add to the conversation if I got the answer there. Looking under the subdivision regulations, the power of the Planning Commission is either to grant or deny the requested item for it. My read of the code is that you could not approve it with conditions. It would just be your ability to grant the variance or to deny the variance based on the code language that we have at the moment. So I don't see it as, it's more of a binary item at this point, I think.
Thank you.
Jeff, David Carter, Chair. Mr. Amon has raised his hand, but I'm going to ask Commissioner Struckoff to speak first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff. I want a clarification of the sidewalk length that is being required under the current development code. When I look at that stretch on the northwest outer curve from the existing piece of sidewalk that serves the bus stop in front of Plasticon's front door to the southernmost point of what is, I think, called Lot 7, Block C. That is the southernmost point along Greenway Circle of the added portion of this proposal. I'm getting 600 feet. I'm not sure where the 1,000. Unless it's that it has to be extended to the east beyond the bus stop as well. That must be it.
Right. Yes, Catherine Week, planning staff.
Okay.
Because they're going through the platting process and a major site plan, they would be
gotcha.
To bring the entire site lines, which would be the entire frontage of Greenway Circle there that abuts their property.
Thank you, Catherine. Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff again. I'm torn on this because from a practical matter, I agree with Commissioner Willie's comments. However, this is how we get to situations where we don't have sidewalks on both sides of the street later. And then we say, well, there's not a sidewalk there, so we're not going to add one now, or we're going to request a variance because there's not a sidewalk. There's not a sidewalk because we requested a variance previously. And so we go down that road. We also do that with right-of-way variances. And I've commented on this before, is that that's how you end up with a road that's too narrow. Sometimes we can't foresee that. Sometimes we can't avoid it. And sometimes it's a practical matter to grant the variance because every other building on the street is that close to the road. I'm less inclined to feel that way about sidewalks in general, but in this case, I'm a little more conflicted simply because of the practicality of the matter. versus the fact that it's a priority network, and when those lots are developed, we're going to want those sidewalks to be there in the past. So I'm still on the fence on this one.
Thank you, Commissioner Strickhoff. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Strickhoff. I mean, that's pretty much the point. If we grant the variance not to build a sidewalk, it runs with the land. So if anything triggers adjacent properties to come in compliance with current codes, which would require sidewalks, we're never going to get a sidewalk on this side of the street if we approve this variance tonight, unless they do something that triggers, you know, redoing it under the code. And I think I have a lot of conflict about sidewalks. You know, I remember very well how we got to 2 sidewalks on 2 sides of the street. That was a very large community effort. It was a neighborhood initiative. It was a rough road to go to get that into the code. And sometimes it doesn't make much sense that you're going to have it, but that's what the code is. And I would just remind everyone that we're sitting as a quasi-judicial body right now. We've got a code that's been adopted by the commission. This is essentially the law that's in place. And we have facts in front of us, and we have very specific requirements for findings to make in order to grant a variance. And, you know, whether this is cost effective or it makes sense to have a sidewalk here, those aren't part of what our charge is right now. Our charge is simply, do they meet these 3 exceptions so that they can be different from what's required for the rest of the community? And I don't think that's been met here. And as Jeff pointed out, our only decisions are yes or no tonight, because the request is simply for a variance. It's not a request to defer the sidewalk building like we got somewhere else. It's not a request for any other thing. It's, I want a variance forever and ever, never to build a sidewalk. And as Commissioner Payton and Commissioner Strickhoff and Commissioner Ashworth have pointed out, we don't know what's going to happen to these other plans. And we have other committees, Transportation 2040 also, that says that we want to have multimodal transportation available on all these, in all these areas. It's in Venture Park, just the fact that, you know, East Hills existed long before, so it didn't come in under the current codes. That's not part of our consideration tonight. So I just want to kind of stress the fact that we have a very narrow set of facts we have to look at and apply the code. And do these particular circumstances demand an exception to our rules? And that's all we have tonight, unfortunately, even if we don't like having to put sidewalks everywhere.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. I'm energized by the number of comments we've heard from commissioners tonight, because I've been wanting to speak up, but I keep deferring to others. And I really appreciate your making this such a cut and dried issue. And I'm grateful to Catherine for her presentation and the presentation of the priority network and what is in the plan and what is in the code. You know, this is a district that is growing and changing. We expect there to be more lots developed. And I would agree with the points that Commissioner Carpenter, that several commissioners have made about the, given the choices we have tonight, what we are creating, what we're being asked to participate in, are creating the preconditions for either continued lack of sidewalks in this area, or the completion of this priority network. And one thing I'd also want to call attention to is that all of the connections to the, you know, to the outside, to points outside of this district would require you to cross the street to access this sidewalk, or the existing sidewalk. There is no point. You've got sidewalks coming in, for example, from Venture Park Drive, but they stop And the sidewalk that exists literally goes in a circle, and there is no connection. There is no participation in this so-called, network. So under the circumstances, I would like to see this sidewalk constructed in conformance with the code to begin completing that network. So I'm inclined to deny this request with all respect to the to the points made by the applicant. Commissioner Sinclair, I think you had raised your hand before I spoke up, so please, I'm going to ask you to.
Sure. Thank you. Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. I raised my hand because I wanted to piggyback on what Commissioner Carpenter said in terms of redirecting focus to sort of the three criteria that we're supposed to consider, and also point out that in order to grant a variance, all three of those, each of the three has to be present, has to be satisfied. They're not like, factors that you balance and consider under the golden case and you can emphasize one over another or whatever. All three of these have to be satisfied. And whenever we get these variance requests, I'm always struck by how high a burden it seems to be for the individuals that are requesting variances. And that puts us I think it puts us in a position of having to deny them more often than not. And that is, I think, the right result, the way this is drafted, the way the code is currently drafted. And I guess ultimately, sort of speaking from, experience in my profession, if the results aren't what people want, you got to go and change the code. You have to go talk to the legislature and lobby. And for something like this, if there are going to be more discussions about sidewalks and the necessity of them and wanting to get variances, then I think there needs to be discussion about loosening these requirements for variances, particularly the unnecessary hardship one, which is really hard to meet, I think. And in this particular case, the undue hardship is, as I understand it, purely financial, and that's specifically, the code says that's not enough to meet that one criteria. And so I agree with the other comments that have been made. If every variance we get is going to some degree, some more than others, have a logic to it and seem like it's a good one to do, I think there's reasons for this one to be granted. But those reasons, unfortunately, don't fall in line with the criteria I think that we have to consider. I don't think the unnecessary hardship criteria has been met. The second one I don't think has been met, the intended purpose of the regulations. I think the third one, maybe we don't need a second sidewalk there to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community or the public, but that's one that I feel like is iffy. The other two I think are pretty clearly not satisfied, and I don't see how we can grant this under these facts and with the standard that we are required to maintain on this and abide by. So I'm at this point also inclined to deny this one.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie, please.
So, boy, I just hate it when our attorney-trained commissioners bring us back to what we're actually here for, and means that we have to hang up our common sense on things that we feel like could be discussed, should be discussed, that we should maybe feel like we have the power to control or suggest, and we don't. And I agree, because I have to, because that's what we are here for, is to look at the variance, and it has that high bar. So I have a question for staff, because I'm still looking for the third way, right? If we deny the variance, is there any other process through which the applicant can come and ask instead for that within the preliminary plat or something like that, for the deferral of building the sidewalk when there's connectivity required? I know we don't have the opportunity to do that now. Is there an opportunity for that?
I'd have to check the code real quick unless Jeff has it open, but even in the major site planning requirements, the sidewalk would be required as the public improvement plan or public improvements associated with that major site plan where the code language is that it must come into compliance with all current codes. And so even at the site planning level, they would still be required to put the sidewalk in. Whether or not the deferral could happen at that point, I'd have to check that section unless Jeff still has chapter 8 open, but they would still be required at the site planning level to put that sidewalk in.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Catherine is right in that instance there. The option of that is to appeal the decision of the Planning Commission, which in this instance would be appealed to the City Commission, if I'm reading my code book correctly for that item. But it would be an appeal of the decision of the item, not necessarily the sidewalk at the hand on that one, but it could fold out in that item. But the appeal process would continue upwards to City Commission.
Thank you both. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Willie, please.
Just one follow-up comment. We talk about sidewalks a lot, and we talk about them for bike ped and connectivity and all those things. The thing we don't talk about, which is always in my mind when we talk about concrete, and when we get to our climate change plan, we will definitely be talking about concrete and the amount of carbon that is required to make it. And so we put in sidewalks because we have a great desire for what they give us, but there is a cost, and not just to who pays the price. It's not just whether it's the city or the applicant. There's a huge climate change cost that comes with concrete, and so that's just it's not today's discussion, but I just want everybody to keep that in mind, that it's not just that there's benefit on one part of the equation, not the other. And finally, I would like to call on and ask if Mr. Amon has any comments or questions.
I do, thank you. I knew when the owner had asked me to take on this task of asking for a variance from the sidewalk, that this was going to be a in-depth discussion, and it's been great comments and great points on both sides. I think, and maybe this is a question for Jeff and Catherine too, because you can kind of tell it's a little bit of a catch-22 for them. So we're asking for the variance. If we get denied, we're stuck. Even though it says in the site plan code, we know that's a code we have to follow because it is a code within the land development. But can we then ask for the formation of, not to post the formation of a benefit district as an option at that point? Or since if we get the, variance denied, and again, we're going through this because we have to replat, because we are replatting, getting rid of the right of way. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. We have to do the replat if they want to expand their building, and then we're stuck putting in the sidewalk. But if we get denied with the sidewalk, is there any avenue out of it? Or are we just purely, I heard appeal to the City Commission, but is there another avenue? Again, the owner is on board with wanting to do, the right thing. Health, safety, welfare, and all of that is important to them, along with jobs in their business. But trying to find a way, if we can, they just struggle when there's 1,000+ feet of sidewalk to nowhere that may sit there for 40 years and never connect anything. When you're looking at, you talk about East Hills Business Park and the lots that are out there, you look at the perimeter. Yes, there's a lot of businesses out there now, but there's a lot of lots out there that have not developed in a long time, and that there may not be a connection for another long time. In my lifetime, who knows? Maybe next week we'll get a business coming in. Hey, I hope so. And let's put the sidewalk in. But so appreciate all the comments. I just want to say that. And the owner would like to see if there is an avenue to avoid. Yes, there is a substantial cost to that they'd like to put into the business rather than lay on the ground and maybe never have used, and see if we could deal with that. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amon. Really appreciate your comments and your observations. Catherine, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Commissioner Willie's question. And looking in the code section for compliance with the city codes under the site planning regulations. So if it is not something that the planning director is able to waive, their route is actually the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so they would have to go through in the site planning process, a Board of Zoning Appeals process to then re-ask for the variance. This particular variance is part of the subdivision regulations. So what you are considering is a variance from subdivision regulations. That code section under the site planning process is a variance from dimensional standards and other city codes. So again, it's a variance process to go through the site planning request after that.
Thank you, Catherine. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. I just point out that at the Board of Zoning Appeals, there are 5 conditions that have to be met for a variance as opposed to 3 that we have here. So it's supposed to be even harder there, but that all depends on the composition of the board, of course.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter, David Carter, Chair. We've heard a lot of really astute observations. I think under the circumstances, we've got some 3 very straightforward preconditions that need to be met. My interpretation of the situation is unchanged. I'm wondering if commissioners have further questions or observations they'd like to raise. But from my point of view, I think we're at a fairly straightforward point in making a decision. Other commissioners? Commissioner Ashworth.
If we're at Commissioner Ashworth, if we're at a point, I can make a motion.
Please do.
I move that the Planning Commission denied the variance requested for a minor subdivision MS 21-00116 from sidewalks as required for Section 2811 C1I for a collector street in accordance with the provisions per Section 2813G of the Land Development Code for property located at 3870 Greenway Circle.
Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Carpenter, thank you. Do we have further discussion before we go to a vote? Really? Sorry, Commissioner Sands, please. I didn't see it on there.
Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner. I'll be voting against the denial. So I wanted to explain further my reasons for that. Some of the things that were brought up, specifically the connection with 19th Street. There are gaps across 19th Street for sidewalks on one side of the road, let alone for 2 sides of the road. And then the word consistency comes up. I think the only thing that we have consistent with sidewalks in our city is its inconsistency. There's neighborhoods that are not more than a quarter of a mile away that don't have sidewalks on either side of the road. And then there's neighborhoods on the west side that have sidewalks all over the place. We're not consistent. That is, in my mind, the spirit of what a variance is for, is to reasonably look at the conditions outside of the code. But I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to vote against it because I don't see the need, and I'm not sure that the argument to have a sidewalk that connects all the way to the city of Eudora it just doesn't make sense to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Other observations or points of discussion? All right, Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands,
No.
Commissioner Shanklin,
No.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff,
Yes.
Commissioner Willie.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-2.
Thank you, Jeff, David Carter, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Amon, for your conversation with us this evening.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Have a good evening.
You too. That takes us to item F2. And before we continue, we have been in session for nearly 2.5 hours. We do have 2 items left. We may knock them out in 20 minutes, but I would entertain any desire for a brief recess before continuing. And I just want to gauge the commission. Do you want to just muscle on through, or would you care to take a brief recess? I think Commissioner Willie, I see you. Would you care to take a
I
recess?
suggest a recess.
Okay, I would suggest a 5-minute recess. Let us come back at 9 sharp. Thank you.
right, while folks trickle back in, I will
Go ahead and introduce item F2. Consider approving a variance of subdivision regulations for minor subdivision at 1516 West 6th Street. And I believe Sandy, you're presenting on this.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planning Office. So this item is related to a variance that you have considered before, and it relates to overall right-of-way width for our principal arterial streets. This is also related to the McCray Lumber property. We considered a rezoning and an amendment to the comprehensive plan to allow for the expansion of that business to the north. The project includes replatting multiple parcels, platted lots into a single platted lot. And through that subdivision process, just like the last item, it is subject to the design standards of the subdivision regulation. Principal arterial streets require 150 feet of total right-of-way. West 6th Street in this area has only 100 feet of total right-of-way width. The applicant, to meet the code standard, would be required to dedicate an additional 25 feet. In so doing, that would basically end up expanding that right-of-way into the existing building that is there. So they would have building that is in right-of-way, and they would have no setback for that building, no front yard. All of those existing improvements would then be incorporated into the public right-of-way. The applicant, as part of the subdivision process, is requesting a variance from the required right-of-way width for West 6th Street. Catherine went over the last item with you, the three criteria: the strict application of the regulations that creates an unnecessary hardship, that the proposed variance is in harmony with the intended purpose of the regulations, and that the public health, safety, and welfare are protected. During the review, and this review of the minor subdivision is still ongoing, it is in process, and there are no plans to widen West 6th Street. We have had some similar application requests for reduction of right-of-way along West 6th Street over the past couple of years, and this is a piece of the code that was adopted in 2006 with the subdivision regulation that is really more applicable to greenfield development than it is to our urban core, as we've pointed out in the past, and that could potentially be one of those elements that we talk about streamlining in a rewrite or revision to the land development code and pieces of it that may touch the subdivision regulations. The applicant is on the call, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you have. Staff's recommendation is to support the request for the variance for this particular project. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. David Carter, Chair. Mr. Hamby, would you care to make any additional comments?
David Hamby here. I don't have any additional comments. Support staff's recommendation, and they've been thorough on that, and they've assisted where we needed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamby. We may indeed have questions. David Carter, Chair. I don't know if we have any public present to solicit, but if there is anyone who would like to speak out on this, please raise your hand. And Kyle, I already saw you looking around. Anybody in the chambers that might be speaking here to speak?
Kyle Kobe with Planning. I did just double check. There is no one in the room to speak on this item, and I do not see any digital hands going up at this time either.
Thank you, Kyle. David Carter, Chair. Turn it over to the Commission for questions to the Sandy or to Mr. Hamby. Commissioner Willie.
And Willie, Planning Commissioner, I would make a motion.
If we have no questions, I think it would be appropriate.
I move to approve the variance to allow the reduction of right-of-way for West 6th Street from 75 feet to 50 feet associated with minor subdivision MS 2196 for McCray Lumber.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Struckoff, thank you. Any further discussion before we go to a vote? All right, with that, Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
I think you're muted, Commissioner Shanklin. Was that a yes?
Commissioner Shanklin, you're showing as being unmuted on my screen now, but I can't hear anything.
I guess a point of order, David Carter, Chair, forgive me for interrupting the vote. What is appropriate under the circumstances? Is it appropriate to continue with other commissioners and come back to Commissioner Shanklin?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. I believe we're trying to get a line admitted to the room real quick. I think that might solve the issue. So
very good.
bear with us one moment.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shanklin, is the connection back and going?
I have audio.
Oh, yes. Perfect. The motion on the table, Commissioner Shanklin, are you for or against the motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. So you didn't get my vote. I'm sorry. I voted in favor.
Oh, yep. So have that down as a yes. Okay. Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
And Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. And that brings us to the final item on our agenda, item F3. Consider a letter prepared by the Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair related to the board's membership composition and appointments. And I believe, Jeff, you were going to make the initial presentation.
Certainly.
Of Craig Planning and Development Services. This is a continuation from, your meeting kind of in February and also a continuation from October. And so attached to the item this evening is a revised draft of the letter for your discussion and consideration. And happy to turn over to the Chair and Vice Chair to kind of guide that discussion.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair.
So the basic idea behind this, just to recap where we stood, we had a very lengthy discussion about issues of diversity and representation and what we were really after with, I believe it was originally Commissioner Carpenter's suggestion to consider the possibility of setting aside some portion of seats on this commission for people living outside of the incorporated part of Lawrence and or incorporated part of the county. And Commissioner Sinclair and I spent quite a bit of time afterwards discussing what we thought were the appropriate next steps. And what we decided on was frankly to address that issue. Issues of diversity and representation, the the perspectives that enrich debate on this commission based on the multiple and intersectional ways in which people bring, new insights into what we do was not really the business of this letter. The business of this letter was to, as I think Commissioner Carpenter put in our last discussion, to provoke a discussion within the County Commission of how to deal with the particular insights that residents outside the city bring to issues of land use policy or execution of land use policy in unincorporated areas. And that was the main idea behind the edits. I would say that if this, if the original letters were a sandwich, we essentially kept the bread the same and changed the filling. The opening and closing of the letter are fundamentally the same as I believe both drafts, but we tried to address more specifically and more directly why we were talking about the issue of rural representation specifically. So with that, what I'd just like to say that I mean, if the commission is happy enough with the current draft to say, yes, let's pass it on to the county commission, that's great. If members of the commission want to wordsmith and change specific phrases, I think Commissioner Sinclair and I are fine with that as well. But we did want to at least make clear why we had made these specific edits that we did. So with that, I will turn it over to commissioners. Oh, forgive me, I should ask Commissioner Sinclair, did you want to make any additional comments?
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. No, Mr. Chair, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you covered it well.
Okay, thank you, David Carter, Chair. With that, I'll turn it over to members of the commission for their specific observations or recommendations for amendments. And perhaps I'll start with Commissioner Carpenter. Do you have any observations you'd like to make about this letter and how it meets your objectives?
I prefer not to start with me since I first brought this up in September of last year, and it's been 7 months. So, and I've had my say, I think 4 times now.
Okay.
So let's hear what others have to say.
Fair enough. So David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Sands.
I'll start off. Thank you. I think the effort is well-intentioned and well-reasoned. My only concern, and I think I brought this up before, is that changing the wording to be more of a request than a specific ask to change a policy is probably not strong enough. I'm not concerned, frankly, with this county commission. I think I really think they will probably try to well represent everybody. My concern would be the next county commission and the one after that who doesn't have the benefit of having this interaction or correspondence from the planning commission. I don't think that pressing for some level of representation from the unincorporated areas is necessarily a bad thing. I like it, and while I hear and understand and appreciate the arguments of, well, if we consider that as a condition of membership, then what other factors should we consider as a condition of membership? I understand that argument, but I think it's well worded in here as it applies to land use. Residents of the unincorporated areas bring experience, education, perspective that we don't always get to hear. And I think with the original intent, if the original intent was to ask for specific numbers of the unincorporated areas, I think that I would support that. But if the rest of the body believes that this is the most appropriate language, then I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Appreciate your feedback. Before we continue, I'm going to ask Commissioner Struckhoff, but I'd just like to ask David Carter, Chair, by the way, I'd like to ask staff Whatever amendments get suggested or requested here, I assume those that get incorporated into a final draft that Commissioner Sinclair and I will sign. I just want to double check, or does this come back for yet another draft that needs to be voted on by the commission?
Craig, Planning and Development Services Director, that is at the discretion of the commission, honestly. If you'd like to have it come back in a final form to view it and sign, that's perfectly fine. Otherwise, the commission can direct to sign as, based on the amendments and just have them go through. But it's purely at your discretion on that item.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. I'd just like to say to the rest of the commission, I guess it depends on the number of
Changes that are suggested. I would be very happy to sign whatever we agree on collectively this evening. But we'll see where the discussion takes us. So, Commissioner Sands, what did you want to say?
Just a quick, Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner. Would it be, we already have a draft, or we've already seen a draft that asks for a specific number of appointments from the unincorporated areas? Would it be within the rules of order to have one draft that asks for them to change their method of selection, and then one that merely suggests it, have those side by side, and then we can vote on which one we prefer as a body?
I guess what you're suggesting is a return to two distinct drafts, and then we choose between them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I recall that we had that discussion. I mean, I like the language of asking for them to change the manner that they select, but.
Okay, thanks. David Carter, Chair. My preference is to stick with one draft, since my understanding of our last discussion was that we would, that Commissioner Sinclair and I would return with a single draft. But your point is taken. Let's see where the discussion takes us. Commissioner Struckoff, please.
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff. I like this draft, which synthesizes both of the previous drafts into, as Commissioner Carpenter put it, a discussion stimulating proposal. I think suggesting that one very clear way that this our objective could be achieved is by changing the number of appointees and their residency requirements, and also suggesting a less formal approach. So I think that's satisfactory. To me, this draft serves to start that discussion and to give a couple of suggestions for ways they can do that. The spectrum of possibilities between the two is left to the commissions.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckoff. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Carpenter, you wanted to say something.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. I think the last thing I'd like to do is put this off to another meeting, because it's going to be 2 months from now, and two of our current commissioners are going to be gone in 2 months. So, and we're going to have to start over with two new people to bring them up to speed about where we are. And it'll also be past the time where the county has appointed Commissioner Struckoff's successor. Commissioner Sands' successor has already been appointed last week by the City Commission, but as of tonight's agenda for the County Commission, they have still saying that they have a position open to fill on the Planning Commission, which is Commissioner Struckoff. So they haven't filled that one yet. So I'd prefer we get something there sooner rather than later. Of course, my hope is also that the county commissioners have been watching our meetings, which I think they have. So they've heard most of our discussions so far. And this is really just a formality at this point, which is so far down the line that I don't know. I really don't know why we took 7 months for a letter. This version is much better than what we've had before, and I appreciate the effort you put into it. And if it comes down to it, there's nothing to stop one of or two of us or whatever to speak at the county commission meeting when they bring it up, so we can be there to answer questions if they have. So same with the city commission, which is going to have to look at this eventually too. So that's all I have to say. This letter is much better. If there are little tweaks that are suggested that can just go into it for Commissioners Carter and Sinclair to sign, that's fine with me. But otherwise, we can just send this one and be available for questions at the county commission meeting and the city commission meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. David Carter, Chair. Commissioner Struckoff.
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff. And just to clarify, I believe that June will be my last meeting, so I will be here for 2 more meetings.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And then the county will have another person to appoint.
Very good.
Well, that's puzzling since the city commission appointed somebody last week for Commissioner Sands' seat. They're really ahead of the game, I suppose, because I always thought it was June. So I was surprised when it was already done.
Thank you both, David Carter, Chair. Other observations, questions? You got I guess Commissioner Sinclair and I are the applicants. Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, I just want to say I have no desire to wordsmith this. I think Commissioners Carter and Commissioner Sinclair have done a fine job of putting our sentiments on paper. And I think it's quite clear what the sentiment is. And I'm perfectly happy with this.
Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. David Carter, Chair. Other observations, questions? Suggestions? I would like to say Commissioner Shanklin was offered some written feedback. Do you have any further suggestions, or amendments that you'd like to make to this letter?
This is Greg Shanklin, Planning Commissioner. I don't have video, so I don't know if you can see me or not, but
Yes.
thank you for recognizing me. I think this is a fine letter. And I think, concur with Commissioner Sands that in that second sentence of the 4th paragraph, we might simply do away with the text that reads to less formal practices that nonetheless take the urban or rural urban dynamic into account, and instead state as ideally this consideration would be an amendment to the ordinance. But that's my only, suggestion, and I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Commissioner Shanklin. David Carter, Chair. Anyone want to respond to Commissioner Shanklin's observation or suggestion? And one thing I'll just say is I, for one, will sign as chair whatever draft the commission agrees to. My personal perspective, as I think I raised in our last discussion, is that I'm not personally in favor of suggesting a specific number of commissioners to be appointed from outside the city. But in the spirit of provoking a discussion, I think it's important to raise that as a specific remedy. That said, I'm not wedded to the wording and would do away with it if that's what the majority of the commission suggests. I think until somebody else wants to speak, what I did want to say, in the beginning of the previous sentence, we respectfully request that appointments by the chair and board, chair of the Board of County Commissioners give special consideration to representation on the Planning Commission by residents of unincorporated parts of Douglas County. So that is the specific ask. That is the specific ask. The next sentence then merely gives it, some options for how that could be realized. Other observations, questions, suggestions? If anybody wants to respond specifically to Commissioner Shanklin's idea, that's great. I think we've had a couple of people who, okay, Commissioner Sinclair.
Yeah, Luke Sinclair, Planning Commission. I don't want to, sorry, cut short any other discussion on it, but just to sort of jump on where the Chair Carter was going in response to Commissioner Shanklin's suggestion and Commissioner Sands. I was also one of the people that didn't like the idea of making a specific ask and liked the idea more of, suggesting this as something that we as a commission are concerned about and want the Board of County Commissioners to be mindful of. And so I viewed the way the letter is currently drafted as a way of accounting for both of those perspectives on the commission. And it wasn't just Chair Carter that didn't want to have a specific letter saying, or a letter saying, we want, you to consider changing the ordinance. There were more than just he. And with that, though, I guess like if 8 of the commissioners want the letter to have a specific demand like that, I agree with Chair Carter. I would be okay with that. But to the extent that there is diversity of opinion on that issue, I think this letter does a good job of at least getting it in front of the commission. We can get it there quickly for the reasons that Commissioner Carpenter suggested. And just at least start the conversation instead of trying to get to a point where we have a letter that, to the person, we have 10 people agreeing, on, and we've convinced everyone to go one way or the other.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. Commissioner Struckhoff.
Commissioner Struckhoff here. I don't object to the language of less formal practices. We are stimulating discussion. And we want to we're just giving a couple of suggestions. So I'm content with the letter as it's written.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckhoff. David Carter, Chair. Other feedback? Commissioner Willie.
Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. I was and am in favor of making a specific request because I think that that's what guarantees that we generate a discussion on the other end. I think it's very possible to take this letter and say, that's nice, and put it on the shelf and say, of course we consider all things, without really coming to any kind of meaningful discussion that we were hoping to prompt. So I think the letter is weak. I don't have a problem with the way it is written. I think unless we ask for something, we don't generate discussion. So if this is what people want to sign, I think the 7 months we waited for it weakens it more than the language itself does. So I will support what my fellow commissioners would like to see from this. I think we've at least expressed that we have some value in rural voices, but I think we could have done better.
Thank you for your candid observation. David Carter, Chair. Other perspectives? Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, given that there is now silence and no one is making further comments, is the next step, is this a motion to accept? Who would like to go forward with this letter? What is the next step? I would like to move on.
Well, I think we have David Carter, Chair. We have 2 commissioners who have made a suggestion to, I think the only specific suggestion we've gotten has been to strengthen the ask, to make it, for example, rather than say this consideration could range from, we could remove that phrase and say something like, the most obvious remedy would be, and then an amendment to ordinance, blah, 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 requiring that a set number of commissioners reside in unincorporated area parts of the county, period. So for example, that would be one way to just take out the weak language and make it and provoke the discussion. And basically, if we left the rest of the letter the same, then we're giving context, we're giving justification, and we're not raising. By the way, Commissioner Sinclair and I did remove multiple references to diversity from the previous drafts, which I don't know if it irked anyone else, but I think it called attention to it. It raised other discussions that don't necessarily need to be had in connection with this particular ask. Because as I said in our last discussion, there are lots of perspectives that we don't take into account in our general deliberations, but that's not the point of this ask. Commissioner Struckhoff.
Commissioner Eric Struckhoff. I think that revision that you just described is fine. Whether it is followed by a suggestion that there are other opportunities, other possibilities or not, I don't know, but I think it does strengthen it, and it is succinct, and it makes the stronger ask.
Thank you, Commissioner Struckhoff. I'll ask Commissioner Willie, what do you think of?
I think it's fine what you suggested.
Thank you. Commissioner Carpenter.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission. I agree. That's what the original ask was. And nobody on this commission needs to be timid. We make hard decisions all the time, and we can have opinions. And like I referenced the last time we talked about it, we're just making a recommendation. This is what we think helps us. This is what we would like. What they do with it is going to be up to them and the city commission. So I'd prefer, with the language you just suggested, we drop all the others and just say, here's what we're asking for. This is what we're asking for. Please discuss this. And who knows where they'll go with it. But I want to make the direct ask.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. David Carter, Chair. I'm going to ask Commissioner Sinclair, as the co-author of this letter, what do you think of that simplification? Again, to remove the phrase, this consideration could range from an amendment, could range from, and replace it with the most obvious remedy would be, and then to remove the last phrase in that sentence.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner, co-author. I've never seen this letter before tonight.
Oh,
I'm joking. I mean, I get the sense more and more that maybe there's only two of us that aren't comfortable, or when we started this discussion, didn't like the idea of changing the ordinance and having it be a very rigid thing. But, in the spirit of having a letter that the commission sort of, by and large, even if there are some detractors, I'm okay with that particular revision. I mean, I'm sort of the opinion, with Commissioner Carpenter, though I may not agree specifically about that particular ask being necessary. We got to just get this up there so it's on the radar, even if they have been watching these and they know it's percolating. And so I'm okay to do it to spark the conversation and go from there.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinclair. David Carter, Chair. So I just want to read what I would expect to be the sentence that we would be changing. It would say, so in order to ensure the continued successful functioning of the Planning Commission, we respectfully request that appointments by the chair of the Board of County Commissioners give special consideration to representation on the Planning Commission by residents of unincorporated parts of Douglas County, period. The most obvious remedy would be an amendment to Ordinance 3951, Resolution number 69-8, requiring that a set number of commissioners reside in unincorporated areas of the county, period. We find that having membership from both parts of our community ensures that we can best provide guidance and recommendations to the governing bodies, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Sands, for the visual acclamation, and Commissioner Struckoff. I would, so I'll open it up to commissioners. Any other suggestions or changes? Or would any, if not, I'd be happy to accept a motion to accept the letter so that Commissioner Sinclair and I can sign it. Commissioner Sands.
I'd like to make a motion that staff redraft the memorandum as outlined by the chairman and authorize the chairman and the vice chairman to sign that letter and forward it to the Board of County Commissioners for consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Do I have a second? Commissioner Struckoff, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, commissioners, for your input. It's through this kind of discussion we get to what's at least acceptable to the majority of us. I would just like to clarify, Jeff, that will then be printed on city letterhead so that we can submit it to the Board of County Commissioners, correct?
Or whatever, to the department letter.
Jeff Crick, depending on the listeners, yeah, we'd be happy to put it on the Planning Commission letterhead and get that forwarded out for you. And we'll definitely get let the chair and vice chair know when we're ready for signatures on that item.
Fantastic. Thank you, David Carter, Chair. With that brings us to the end of our agenda, lest there be other items that commissioners would like to raise at this point. Commissioner Struckoff.
Commissioner Eric Struckoff, one quick one, going back to the brief sidebar with Commissioner Carpenter and I. The bylaws do indeed state that terms begin in June. As it turns out, both the commissioner whose term who I replaced when he moved in the middle of his term, and my first meeting were in July's, but that might have been because our seats were simply unfilled until those Julys. But I asked Denny yesterday for clarification on that. But I was planning on being here till June, but if they make me leave, I'll go, sir. I'll go.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification, Commissioner Struckoff. Commissioner Sands.
In that same vein, I would add that I'm expecting to attend the May 28th meeting, if we're going to be on the May 28th, and that my replacement, Mr. Rex Rhodes' term starts on the 31st of May. Maybe staff can give both I and Commissioner Struckoff a read on how they interpret that.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services, be happy to look into the details and get those to both of you. So we'll check on that in the morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just add my congratulations to Chair Carter for his early reappointment to a second term, which occurred at the City Commission meeting a week ago.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter, David Carter, Chair. I just want to say I am so grateful to all of the commissioners. It has been, I am eager to begin my second term. because of the education I have gotten from all of you, and I might say from the great example that I've gotten from previous chairs. And so it is odd that I'm reaching the end of my first term and only now starting to feel like I know what I'm doing. So, I'm sincerely grateful to everybody for creating this environment that has been so rewarding. So thanks for the congratulations. If any other items that folks would like to raise before I accept a motion to adjourn? Seeing none, I would therefore accept a motion to adjourn till next month. Commissioner Sands, do I have a second? Commissioner Ashworth. Jeff, could I ask you to read the roll, please?
Certainly. Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Payton?
Yes.
Commissioner Sands?
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Yes.
Commissioner Willie?
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks to everyone. See you next month.
Thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.
Aye.